Fiance Angela.
Thank you, Anne. And I want to introduce to you Father Raphael and his lovely wife, Kellyann Barberg. They're up in New York. I cannot remember all of a sudden the name of your church.
St. George.
St. George and Niagara Falls.
Niagara
That's right, St. George of Niagara Falls. And I have had the very great pleasure of working with their third grader this year through St. Athanasius. I'm teaching for them now, and it's just been a real joy. Those little people I get to teach, they just brighten up my day on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So first of all, I want to talk about a little bit just to kind of give you an overlay. I want this to be kind of a conversation. So I have an outline, but I want you all to be able to ask questions as things come up. So if you have a question, please put it in the text box, in the chat box, and I'll take a pause, and then Father and Kuria are going to come in and they're going to talk about, they have raised, is it 5 or 6?
5.
5. They have 5.
We're still raising.
Yes, they're still raising their children. But they have, they've got some kids that are already through high school and they're doing things out there in the adult world, and they're going to talk about the choices that they help their kids make and also choices they made themselves. So I'm actually going to start out with that. So the choice I made for myself is I graduated high school a long time ago. I'm not going to say when, because nobody believes me anyway when I say when. Everybody's like, oh, but you're too young. So anyway, and I tried to go to college, but I could only go to a huge state university, and I couldn't do it. It was just too big for me. So I decided I quit college, and I had always wanted to be a singer. So I started taking voice lessons more full time. I started working on my music. I started singing with a jazz band a couple of nights a week, and I was doing lots of different things with music. And I was also working jobs to support myself. Eventually, I started studying opera at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City while I was a nanny, and eventually realized that my main goal that I had had since I was 6 years old, to be a wife and a mother, was not going to be accomplished by becoming an opera singer. Not the way I saw my life. My mother was a huge women's rights supporter, as she put it, in a very Christian way. I don't know what that means exactly, but that's what she would say. And I saw the flaws with that. And I was a very devoted Christian all the way through my growing up, and wanted something different. I wanted to be a stay-at-home wife and mother. I wanted to be that Proverbs 31 woman.
What a scientist said about the sound a bird makes.
I love online meetings. Anyway, so I became a nanny full-time and did that for a while until other things came along, and then I met my husband and we got married and decided before we got married to homeschool. And in my heart, I wanted to homeschool however many kids God gave us all the way through high school. But some very wise advice was given to me that it would be a good idea to make the decision to continue to homeschool every year. After I finished the year, then we would make a decision and decide, is this still the way we're going to go? So far, it has remained the way. And I guess we're about done. My youngest, my 17-year-old, is about to graduate from high school. So I guess we're about at the finish line, and it worked out pretty well. So that's my story. And here's the things I do. Homeschool through high school seminar here locally every so often. And I've been to several by people who are much wiser than I am. And so here's the first thing I want to talk about. And that is getting to the finish line. And getting to the finish line does not mean the end of the math book. That's important sometimes, but it's not the finish line. The finish line are transcripts, a diploma, and a celebration. Those are the things that really matter. regardless of what direction your children take, whether they go to college or trade school or start their own businesses, whatever it is, they should have a transcript and a diploma. And you should celebrate that because it is a huge accomplishment to get through 12 years of school. You should be celebrating your own success in that as well. And so that's the beginning. I'm not really going to talk about the how of transcripts. I can tell you there are lots of places you can go to get help with transcripts. HSLDA is a great place. Your state homeschool association, if you have one, which most states do these days, will have resources for that. There are now a bazillion companies out there that will help you put together transcripts. The big thing about a transcript is to write everything down that your child does in a notebook or a 3x5 card or whatever, so that, you know, towards the end, you can put it all into a lovely thing and everything counts. They need a transcript so that they can move forward whenever they decide to do that. So my son right now has decided, my youngest has decided he wants to be an electrician. And there is a company here, he's basically, they hire people full-time and train them as they are working. And that's what he wants to do. But the other day, a few months ago, he came to me and he said, well, but mom, maybe at some point I want to become an electrical engineer. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good plan. That means I have to do a transcript for him. Because no matter what point he goes into college, he will need a transcript. If your child decides they want to go into the military, your child will need a transcript and a diploma because the military asks for both. They want a copy of both. So you have to have that. So these are the things that you need to have to get to the finish line. And then the celebration, of course. I think it's really important to do that, even if it's just a small one, to make a big deal out of the accomplishment. So now you're probably sitting there, you might have a 7th or 8th grader or a 9th grader or an 11th grader, or maybe like me, you've got one that's about to graduate and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about this. What are they going to do next? Been there. I have walked with people who've been there, so I know that can be very frightening. And what am I going to do now? I have encouraged both my boys to become priests. Don't know if either of them will take me up on it, but that's an encouragement on my part. So here are some conversations that we need to have. And Father and Kuria, just jump right in if I forget a conversation to have. So one of the very first conversations that I've had with my boys along the way is, how do you see yourself serving God with the rest of your life? And of course, the main answer is going to church, serving in the church, and being part of the life of the church. And that's one of the reasons we homeschool. Our homeschool world, we became Orthodox in 2006. My oldest was 6 years old. All they've ever known is life centered around the church. And even now, when he's off in Florida in the Air Force, on his Air Force base, he goes to church. He makes that a priority, which I'm so grateful for. And it's God. It's all God. I didn't do anything particularly amazing or special to get him to do that, except perhaps make that our routine, make that our habit. We go to church. We started out trying to go to church every time the doors were open, and our priest said, you might want to slow down there. It'll be okay if you're not there every time the doors open. Because the boys were little, and it was a little difficult sometimes to have them in church when they were, 5:30 for Vespers, when they're tired and hungry and kind of freaking out over things. But when there was a liturgy, we tried to be there. When we made a plan of regular services that we would attend during the week. Western Rite's a little different than Eastern Rite. We don't have pre-sanctifieds during Lent or things like that. So but we do have Vespers and Matins, and we have Stations of the Cross and things like that. So we tried to teach the boys that our life should revolve around the life of the church, the seasons, the comings and goings of liturgies and services. But there's more to it than that. Serving God with our lives is also about determining the careers that we are looking at. Are they going to make it so that we can serve God with what we're doing every day? And I think that's some professions. It's not really a question. Maybe I think some are. My younger son had talked about going into the Marines. And that was one of my concerns because I have friends who are Marines, and it was very hard for them to hold on to their faith being a Marine. Some professions make us dig harder, dig deeper into our faith. I'm sure my oldest son eventually wants to be a police officer. He's going to have to dig into his faith and have it really be rooted inside of him in order for him to do that, I think. But I can tell you when I was thinking I wanted to be an opera singer and be on stage all the time, I began to realize that was going to be detrimental to my faith, that it was going to be hard for me to serve God and serve all the people, serve that stage, that there was a conflict. There was going to be a conflict there. And I really want to have to make that choice every day. So I think we have to encourage our children to think about that. The next conversation is with your child. What does your child enjoy learning? What do they enjoy doing? And, have your child ask themselves that. What do I enjoy? What about my education has really appealed to me? And what am I doing just because I need to do it? My oldest is a huge history nut, especially military history. Math, he could have gone his whole life without doing any math. That would have been fine with him. But history, when he wouldn't do anything else, he would read Winston Churchill's histories. I don't know another kid that does that, but he was 12. He liked it. I was fine. Writing papers about that history, not so much, but we got there eventually. My youngest son enjoys doing things with his hands. He enjoys learning new things. He enjoys starting projects, not always finishing them, but definitely starting them. He likes connecting things to other things, if that makes any sense. And so being an electrician kind of makes sense because that's basically what they do. They connect things to other things and make lights come on. I figure that's pretty good. So asking those questions, those are questions that a guidance counselor would ask. And speaking of guidance counselors, if you have someone in your parish or in your life that can be another sounding board for your child on these things, that is terrific. Someone that can help your teenager evaluate their strengths and their weaknesses so that they can figure out what's my path. We have a wonderful man in our parish. He's an older man. He was a Marine and then became an educator. My son admires him a great deal, my oldest. And when my son was struggling with this idea he had in his head, he wanted to be a fighter pilot. One of the things that this older gentleman in our parish said was, Zach, your strength does not lie in, 1 second decisions. That's not your strength. You don't do snap decisions well. And so maybe being a fighter pilot isn't really what you ought to be doing. Plus you don't like math. Pilots have to have a lot of math. And I was saying the exact same things to my son. And he would look at me and say, Mom, you have no idea what you're talking about. But with Mr. Pileski, he said, oh, okay. Like, all right, fine. just so long as you hear it from somebody somewhere, that's what's really necessary. So finding someone that can help your student evaluate him or herself is important. Sometimes they can't hear us anymore. And so they need to be able to hear somebody. The other nice thing to have is there are lots and lots of online aptitude tests, and community colleges often have these. So that's another valuable tool. Kuria, did you have something you wanted to say?
I didn't realize I was muted. You muted us, but I didn't want to interrupt you because everything you're saying is leading up to that. But going back to having someone to be able to speak in your children's lives other than ourselves, because our community is important. So that, again, that goes with the church and having people around our children that know them, that see us as a family. And so, yeah, the community is important because we've had very similar situations with our older two, particularly. And we've moved 4 different times in 10 years. So it was very difficult sort of to kind of foster that. But thankfully, we have some people like that in our children's lives. A similar situation with our daughter. She speeded through high school and then wanted to go to college for nursing. And we knew, because of the math and the intense studying, though we could see her as a nurse, we just knew the studying. But now she's the chef and she's just loving her life. But it was someone who spoke in her life. What is it that you love? And these are the things that we kept saying to her, right? What is it that you love? What is it that you're naturally, it's just innate in you, that you love to do, that you find joy, that you can give back to people, that you can be out of your, be kind of out of yourself, not selfishly, like I'm going to make a ton of money. Not that that's not a bad thing, but what can we do to give back? And it was my girlfriend who knew she was a good little baker since she was a little girl and knew she was a cook. And she said, ever thought of that? And she worked her way up from hostess to waitress to just point blank asking the chef at the Japanese restaurant, can I just learn what you do back there? And she did it. And it was turned into an internship, and now she's onto her own kitchen now and her own thing. So it was also instilling them to be proactive for themselves and advocate for themselves, that they are comfortable with who they are and they get comfortable with their way of learning, that they have like strengths and weaknesses in their learning. That doesn't make them a bad student, doesn't make them a bad kid. It's just, we're limited beings, so we know our limitations. And so I think to teach them and help them, especially us as parents, but having others that we can trust that can help them navigate their limitations, that those aren't hang-ups, they're just navigating. It's almost making the path a little bit easier for them, and it's daunting and it's hard sometimes, and you've got stubborn kids and children that they know what they want to do, and some really do, but it is the community. I'm being redundant, but yeah, I love that you said that about getting someone else and having someone else you can trust.
And along with them telling your student and the things that you'd like to tell them, but they're more receptive to them. I think also the people in our kids' life can also tell us stuff that maybe our kids haven't been able to get across to us as well. They noticed that somebody's good at something, and because we are so subjective when it comes to our children. We're embarrassed by them, we're proud of them, or we have these high hopes, or we have these fears, and it's very difficult for us to be very objective about them. And so having these people in our life also allows us to have another source for having some clear insight into what's going on.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a huge component to helping our children navigate these next turning years, because what we want is them to eventually, they have to make these decisions on their own. They're not going to always have us and everybody else around them. So it's nurturing that. It's much more, you're right, much more than the math book, much more than just the history that they know, which is great, but that they can think and have discernment and wisdom and the next steps that they have to take. And this takes time. We all know that. You know that. You're a parent of an older, just not a light. It's not a switch on the light that you can just, I got it. I'm almost 50 and I don't have it.
I know.
So anyway, I didn't mean to go off on a segue, but I really love that you brought that up. I really did. I really like that you brought that up. Thank you.
It really is important. you know, one of the reasons why I made such a point of making sure that my kids had somebody they could talk to was because I didn't growing up. We moved around so much. By the time I was 18, I'd lived in 50 different houses and about, well, 12 states, several different cities. I mean, I'd moved all over the place and I didn't have anyone I could talk to. And my guidance counselor at high school wasn't any good. I mean, wasn't any help. They didn't know me. It was my senior year. It was a new high school. They couldn't help me. So having those people in our kids' lives is really important. I think it's also very helpful to be able to say to that person, what do you think about my kids? You know, how do you think they're doing? It's one of the reasons why my kids have always had at least one class since they were in 7th grade, at least one class not with me. Because then I can say to the teacher, what do you think about, I need you to evaluate my child for me. Because, you know, I can think my child is all full of roses and sunny weather. I know that's not true, but, you know, I can think my kid's the smartest kid on the block. And I probably need somebody to tell me, yeah, maybe not so much with this one thing over here.
Or vice versa. I mean,
or vice versa, yeah.
I'm not a fan of former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, but she did make a quote saying, "It takes a village to raise a child," which was mocked, and you know, I'm not sure necessarily agree with the context he was using, but the quote from you know, African tribal wisdom, I think, is where it's from.
Yes,
it's true. It's true. If we're trying to raise our children in this little isolated cell, you know, because the world's a dangerous place and there are dangerous people even within our families and whatever else. Of course, we've got to be discerning. Of course, we've got to be careful. Of course, we got to be vigilant. But we need our church community. When we started homeschooling at we're back to our home parish, and people there they're almost all public school teachers, and we got no support or whatever.
20 some years later,
our extended family somewhat supportive, but nobody's done this, and so, but you know, we needed them. We needed all of their insight, and to any degree of success we've had so far. We've got a long ways to go before we can, you know, have the major celebration. It's because of the people in our kids' lives that love them as much as we love them, that love us, that are good at pointing out, you know, things that they see that maybe, you know, is hard to because we're not willing to see where we're missing the boat or something.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, it was a good point. Really good point. Thank you.
So then the last part of these conversations is, of course, what do I do now? My child really has no clue. So first of all, do not put them into college when they really have no clue. That is a waste of time and a waste of money. They won't figure it out while they're in college for a year, I promise you. My husband works for a university, a large university, and he can tell you firsthand that most of the 18 and 19-year-olds in there probably shouldn't be there. They probably should have waited. So if your child really doesn't know, graduate from high school and send them into the world with a job, tell them they have to pay, you know, $50 a month rent, whatever, give them some responsibility, give them what it's like to be an adult. They don't have to move out or anything like that, but you know, encourage them. Tell them, okay, now you're not doing anything, go get a full-time job anywhere, somewhere, grocery store, I don't care. Learn what it's like to be responsible, actually fully responsible for your own life. We did that with my son for a little while because we weren't sure when he was going to be able to get into the Air Force. It was very backed up. I don't know why. It wasn't COVID yet. So we were like, well, you got to go get a job. And he's like, job? I'm like, yeah, a job. And my son is very cautious. And so he was like, you mean I have to go somewhere and maybe do something that I don't know how to do it yet? And now you're going to tell me I have to do it now? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying to you. Go forth and conquer, son. So that was one of the things. Another thing that they can be on the lookout for are apprenticeships with friends, neighbors. I know when I was first investigating homeschooling many years ago, before I was married to my husband, but I was going to church with him, there was a family that I got close to that had homeschooled. They had 10 children and they had already graduated 5. And their third son, if I'm remembering correctly, one summer he started his own landscape business when he was like in 9th grade. And it was just in the neighborhood. And pretty soon, by the next summer, he had like 5 streets where he was going around mowing lawns, trimming hedges. And it went on until by the time he was his summer between his junior and senior year, he had a real business. He was able to buy himself a pickup truck. He was able to do these things. And at the end of that, he ended up opening up his own landscaping business right out of high school. He took some business classes at the local community college to learn how to manage a business over the summer. And then later on decided he was going to go get a degree in landscaping. I don't know what that means. It's some kind of arts degree you can get in landscaping. I don't know what that is. But anyway, he did eventually go to college and became a landscape architect while running his company. And he got married. And I think now he and his wife have 7 kids. So this was back in the 90s. But it all started because in 7th grade, they had a friend of the church who hired him as a 7th grader and an 8th grader to run a lawnmower for his company. And he always, when he was doing his own thing, was always checking in with this friend. And this friend of the family was helping him understand how to do these things, how to trim a bush, what's the best way, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of apprenticeships, shadowing, internships, these are all part of the toolbox, if you will, of figuring out what am I going to do next after I'm done with high school. And because we're homeschooling, if we are doing homeschooling instead of public school at home, that means we've got all this lovely time when other kids are in school to take advantage of finding these things for our kids to be part of, helping them find a path. There was a talk years ago at the St. Amelia conference. It was from Gal, and she was kind of giving a same sort of talk. My husband went to it, and she was talking about how her daughter also really loved to bake, didn't know what she wanted to do. She got an internship at a little bakery in town. The mom had to convince the owner to do it. The daughter wrote a whole resume and an essay about why she wanted to learn how to bake. And eventually the baker, the owner of the shop, said, all right, fine, we'll give it a try. We'll see what happens. I've not had any luck with teenagers before, but let's see what happens. And the end of the story is she ended up with her own bakery. So these are the things that we can do with our kids that you wouldn't necessarily get to do if they were public schooling. And I think it's important to think well outside the box with these sorts of ideas, especially when we see our child gravitating to one thing or another. If it weren't for COVID, my son would be interning right now with a friend of ours who's an electrician. But because of COVID, that opportunity kind of dried up for now. Any questions so far? Okay. I have found that I'm the kind of person that when I'm in an online meeting, I tend to fill up the space. So I'm going to keep talking. If you have a question, just knock me over and I'll shut up.
I think when they don't know, so we're the product of a child we did send to college that didn't know. And so it was, and you can still navigate, and now he's home, graduated. He graduated, and he did, but he realized while he was there, I don't even know what I want to do. I don't know. I'm just going to get this degree. He's now post college, and it feels like it's post high school. And then it's COVID, and we're in a new area. Even though we're from here, he moved away 11 years before, so he wasn't integrated into the community. So it's been very difficult. So I mean, a lot that you're saying, we could even be there post-college, even if our kids know what they're doing, know what he did fine. He graduated. We were excited. We had a celebration. He went to Hellenic college, Orthodox college, because he wanted to be around other Orthodox people. That was very important to him. But post-college now, it's been a real difficult time to launch during all this. So a lot of patience, again, giving them responsibility. But when they're 24 years old, you know, there's so much even more that you have to kind of let go. But again, the responsibility. So it encourages me, even with a 24-year-old here at the house, you know, it's difficult even post-college, you know, and you know, hindsight is 2020, right? And we could have done this, and we could have done that, and we were transferred again. So we couldn't leave this kid home, and so there was a lot of things. So it's like go to college, and he doesn't regret it. It's not this remorse, but it's been very difficult for him to kind of launch something right now. Yeah. And now we're at the precipice of, should I go back to grad school? We're discussing these things. So this is very helpful to us again. I feel like you think you're done at high school, and you're not. You're just not. And then they go to college, and you think, okay, they're on their way. And you're like, no, they're not. So adult children is a whole another ball game, isn't it? It's just, so, I mean, we're right here with you. We're not experts just because we've had 5 kids. A lot of times we get that, like, oh, I need your advice. I'm like, no. I don't, you know, we're still in it too. You know, maybe we're learning some mistakes, and it was like our guinea pigs, our first children, our poor children. You know, but,
you know, when our kids were small, and maybe the eldest in 4th, 5th grade or something, have an opportunity to speak at a homeschooling conference. Oh yes, I got all this, you know,
information to tell you.
This is the best, and we know what we're doing, whatever type of thing. And now that, you know, we've got, you know, our youngest
3,
is 10, and we've got one will be, you know, so we'll have 3 young adults here. It's, oh my gosh, it's a struggle, guys. It's
we're with you. Sorry.
No, but Nathaniel loves it.
Oh, he loves this. And this is a whole different, and each child that we homeschooled, it looked different for every single one. And then we also knew a priest. He had 7 daughters, and he did say, it's, you know, it's not the decision you make for one kid isn't the same decision you make for another kid. And again, the same advice that we got was just take that decision every year. I even gave myself 6 months. I'm going to make it to January. I make it to January. I'll make it maybe to May, you know, and I'm still that way with every child, even the older ones. But I didn't mean to segue, but
no, it's okay.
Without saying that it seems like there's such a formula, and there is. I really think we have to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, because I don't even know, I lost my train of thought, and I'm so sorry, I apologize. But there is a formula to follow, but we have to be gentle with ourselves when our children, who have free wills, they're growing into this adulthood. And again, that's why the community comes in play, having these minds to go, okay, let me fall back on this again. Let me ask these same questions again. And anyway, I didn't mean to segue.
No, you're fine, because you said a good word there, formula.
Yeah.
So whose formula are we following? Are we following the formula that the world says works?
Exactly. Yeah.
Are we following the formula that God has given our child, or given to us for our child? What formula are we following? And my husband and I talk about this a lot, because like I said, he works in a college, he works in a university, and the formula seems to have become a default instead of a real formula. And that is, everybody goes to college.
Yep.
Well, that's fine. No, it's not. College is not for everybody, not in any way, shape, or form. And we have to be sensitive to that. We have to think about that. And there are lots of things that people can choose, many professions that don't require college, certainly not 4-year college, maybe an associate's degree, that are fulfilling. You can support a family on them. that you can enjoy, that don't require to go into $100,000 worth of debt to go to college, to come out and not really know what exactly it is we're doing. So here's some of the things to think about when you start looking at the formula for your child. Think about apprenticeships, certification programs, trade school. Now, when I was in college, or when I was in high school, the high school I went to, my first 2 years of high school, was a wonderful place. It had a trade school within the high school. It had, I mean, it was just this humongous place. And you could start trade school at high school, doing learning to be an electrician, a plumber, HVAC, machinist, welding, mechatronics. I even went to the welding class for a semester because I thought that would be really cool. And it was really cool. And I thought, I'll never use this. And then when I was 19 or 20, when I was 20, I decided to go on the road with a group called Covenant Players. And my father wouldn't let me get my driver's license until I knew how a car worked and how I could change the oil and change a tire and, change the spark plugs. I had to know how to do all of that on our family car before my dad would let me get my driver's license. So I was the only one in our team that knew how to take care of the van that we were driving across country in. And at one point, the van lost its muffler. We had somebody donate a muffler, but we didn't have anybody to put the muffler on. And so one garage said, if you can get somebody to put the muffler on, we'll let you use our welding equipment. Guess what I knew how to do? I knew how to weld. I mean, who'd have thought in a million years? I never thought that welding would be a thing that I would actually use in my actual life, but there you go. So the high school that I was in had all of these different things, and you could try out lots of different things. We need to not forget about that. Nowadays, to be in a trade school sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like, it's like it's treated like the pariah, or, oh, that's for the kids who couldn't make it in math. Yeah, no. These are the people that decided, I want to just get on with my life. We have a friend who's a plumber. He makes twice what my husband makes. And he has a master's in library science. Our friend went to trade school, became a plumber, and he's one of the best plumbers in the city now. So don't overlook the trades. Like I said, electrician, plumber, HVAC, machinist, welding. Now they have mechatronics, and a lot of these things you can go to your community college and get certified and start your way to professional in a lot of these careers. There are also companies now. Our tradesmen are suffering. The average age in any given trade is 60 years old. We don't have enough people in our trades, but we will always have toilets. We will always need somebody to fix the wiring in our house. So there are a lot of companies out there that are actually offering full-time work while they train you. And when you come out of that, you've got your professional license. That's what my younger son's gonna do. It is never fails. I'm on a Zoom call and our lawn people come. Hope y'all can't hear all that.
Oh, is that what that is?
Never fails. So that's trade. Think about service. Police officer, firefighter, EMT, 911 operators. Those are all professions that require training, but not necessarily college. And Father Raphael, I believe you can talk to us about one of those positions.
Certainly. You want me to talk now?
Yes, please.
So prior to the priesthood, I was a police officer for the city of Buffalo, New York. Just give you my story real briefly, because I'm well acquainted with the aimlessness of young people, and I think specific, it's a stereotype. It's not always true, of course, but there seems to be a generality to me that often our young ladies have an idea in their head what they want to do, and it's true of some men too. But it often seems to be that a lot of our young men, and this was me, and sure there's some young women too, that just have no idea what they wanted to do or whatever. I went off to school because, again, this is what you're supposed to do. My dad was a Navy flyer, and so I liked science, and I was good at science, and so hey, I'll study physics. Well, you don't go to RIT and study physics without really loving it and getting through there. I did well in high school despite having no work ethic whatsoever. You can't go through college and study physics with no work ethic. So that did not work out so well for me. So I ended up coming back home. My family was my folks were going through a divorce, all kinds of other things. I changed my major to psychology. I was going to State University of Buffalo here to study psychology, which is right up my alley. It was up my alley, but for one reason, the breakup of the family, the financial situation, my needing to find employment for myself sooner rather than later, and still being plagued by not a very good work ethic. I was struggling in school. My mother told me one day, hey, the Buffalo Police Department is having a civil service exam on Saturday morning. I think it was August of 90 or 80, 80 something.
90, 80 something.
Yeah, 80. Now the math's 86, I think it was. So I went, and out of the thousands of people who took the test, I was fortunate enough to do very well in the top. Because of the demographic of quota hiring, you had to do very well to be in my situation. And thank God I ended up getting a job that I never thought that I would be really interested. I mean, every kid plays cops and robbers, right? But the more I got into it, studying at the academy, my personality, I'm not extroverted, which most cops are, and most good cops are extroverted. I am very respectful of people's space, which is not make for a good police officer. But all these things, as I got involved with it, I realized that it was a service to God through serving my neighbor. St. Paul says, if you better do good, because the ruler is a servant of God for good, a minister of God for good. So I looked at it as a ministry. And so I was able to put in a 20-year career. In the meantime, met this wonderful lady, and we got married and had kids. And at some point I found orthodoxy. It's part of the story as well. And ended up being a parish deacon as I was a police officer for a number of years.
But to add that in, you were 21 when he got the job, and he was able to retire. He didn't retire. Here he is doing something else. But he retired at 41. He still was so young, and he had that's why we were able to be.
We couldn't do what we're doing.
Couldn't do what we're doing.
Ministering in the church, even though our parish does very well taking care of us. Having 5 kids and the needs of modern life. Especially if you want to keep mom at home to homeschool and stuff like that. So we're very fortunate. I mean, so I would encourage parents to encourage their children to consider public service. Police work does scare me a little bit in modern life because of, been paying attention in the news the last few years, it has become, but yet there's still honorable men and women who are taking up that call and serving their neighbor. And we need to pray for them, and we need to support them. But so yeah, that's my story. It wasn't as short as I promised, but
thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
We've got a lot of commenting about girls, and I just want to make it very clear that this conversation goes for girls as well as our boys. Yes, while we're encouraging our young men to be priests, we need to encourage our young women to be homemakers, and however that means for them or for you, how you make your home. We're teaching our children all the time. Our dads are teaching our sons how to be men, and our mothers are teaching our daughters how to be wives and mothers, and how to be women that fully embrace the roles that God has given us. All this nonsense about men can be women and women can be men, and we should all be, every single kind of job should be interchangeable. I find that to be ridiculous. I don't think that's right. There are things, of course, that men and women can do equally well, But I gotta tell you, on a dark street, in a dark alley, on a night when there's mischief out there, I'm not so sure that I want a 5'4" blonde, skinny chick in a police uniform, no matter how well she can shoot that gun, to take care of the guy who is trying to mug me. I'm not saying they can't do it.
Yeah, and I tend to talk, because it's safer. You learn, especially as a pastor, whatever, you talk in safe ways and whatever. But the reality is exactly what you said. If I'm wrestling with somebody in the middle of the night, I'm looking for the biggest guy who can come to help pull them off of me. And so that's definitely true. But I also think that police work is often overly characterized as just a brawny situation.
Yes, that's true.
And I truly am grateful. My very first partner, I'm sitting in the reserve room as a rookie, my first night out of the academy, ready to go. And the lieutenant says, yeah, you'll be riding with Kathy Appleford over here. And to be honest with you, my chauvinistic heart sank. I'm like, what? I'm riding with a girl. And well, she ends up being, she broke me in. She was a great cop. And you know why?
Amelia,
it was her.
there's a bunch of art supplies in the garage. Can you get me a couple?
And you might want to mute.
Yeah. So my point being that, yeah, I'm totally agreeing with you, and I'm also totally agreeing with you that my goal for my children, my girls, I'd love for them to be wives and mothers, but at the same time, we cannot pigeonhole exactly how that's going to happen, what's that going to look like. And so for them to have some sort of trade so that they stay with a man because they love him and they've built a family together, not because they're dependent on him to do everything. Because they can't do anything else. They need to stay with the abusive guy because they're not capable.
Which is one of the reasons why I think all of these different, so we also have medical, so things like radiology, pharmacy tech, phlebotomy, nursing. I have many friends who are stay-at-home wives and mothers, but they're also nurses, and they work a shift a week or 2 shifts a week. They're still able to be home full time with their kids and their husbands. And so, yes, I will never say that a girl should not have a profession or a woman should not have a profession. I don't know what mine would be, maybe at this point, but my oldest son is dating a lovely young woman who is studying to become an EMT. That's what she wants to do. And I think that's great. And I would never discourage a girl from doing that, from doing any of those things.
If I could put in a plug for you and my lovely wife, and I know for probably all of the homeschooling moms on here, I mean, if I owned a business, and I needed a right-hand person to help me get things, I'm going to hire a former homeschooling mom, or at least somebody who raised their children, no matter how they did it, but add the homeschooling, that's even ups the qualifications because you do everything, you're involved with everything, you're the most interesting people to talk to because you study so many things, and from people skills to education to the different subject matter you're trying to train your children. So that's there too. Sure, there are uninformed people that might look at you that you've been out of the workforce for 20 years or something like that. But anybody who's got any sort of instinct worth their salt realize, hey, here's somebody who gets the job done. So I just wanted to make sure I said that.
Anna asked a great question about what are some professions that girls could pursue that would help them become good homemakers and wives and mothers. And so there are several, actually. Culinary arts, EMT, because if you think your children aren't going to be bleeding at some point in their future, you are wrong. There will be blood. There will be possibly broken bones. Being an EMT
investigation,
right? Any of these trades, I have a friend who was an electrician before she got married and they started having children. So any of these are great for women and men, as far as I can tell. Business, you've got culinary arts, hospitality, information systems, cybersecurity. Medical coding is another one that people forget about. That is actually, we need medical coding people who do that take notes from the doctor or they're in there taking care of files. And you can stay home and do that these days.
I was just reading this when somebody mentioned a beautician. I have a beautiful story of this. My girlfriend who homeschooled all her girls, 3 of them. Well, she did send her to a little small, like homeschooling academy. Ended up being like the valedictorian of the academy. She wanted to just be a beautician. She has all these smarts, all this knowledge. No, she wanted to work. She's a beautician. She's amazing. And she's what, 19 years old. And so a beautician, I read that. I thought that was sweet because I love the story. We all thought this girl would go on to college and which would have been fine too. But she's, no, I think I'm going to do the beautician work. And if I'm not happy there for a while, college will be there. And that's the thing. College isn't leaving us. It's not, we don't have to hurry all that, so I think,
yeah.
So thank you for that. It was just a neat little story.
That's another really good point, that none of this needs to be hurried.
Yeah.
Not a single, college will always be there. Trade school will always be there. All of this will always be there. Now, we don't want them to just, live in the basement for the rest of their lives, obviously. We want them to have a plan. But the idea that we have to hurry up and decide, that's, again, whose formula is that? It's not my formula. That's the world's formula, and I reject that. My kids, their whole growing up, I've gotten in trouble with my own parents about this. They have not been very supportive at times because I said, look, I don't care if he's 6 years old. He's not ready to read, and I'm not going to make him read just because you said. So my youngest didn't read till he was around 8.5. And by the time he was 10 and a half, he was reading at a 7th grade level. Because when he decided he was ready, and he went, and it was, and I just refuse. I think we all, as homeschoolers, need to reject the things in the world's formula that aren't wisdom. There's truth in everything. My priest is always saying that. You can find a kernel of God's truth in nearly everything that's out there because God made it all. But the formula that the world uses, the public school system, the whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it, is flawed. And we need to not think that we have to, as homeschoolers, live up to that formula. I am constantly saying this to new homeschooling families and even old homeschooling families. Don't try to make that formula fit your life. Talk to God, talk to your priest, talk to each other as husband and wife, and create your own formula. And then as your children get older and bigger and they start, gravitating to one thing or another, then you adjust the formula for them and help them find their own way that is within the church, that is within the path that God has for them.
Our personhood is such an important aspect of our Christian faith, that each one of us is unique. As much as Orthodox Christians, we believe that our fullness is expressed as we are together as the body of Christ, and we eschew individualism. The reality is that we each are individuals as part of the body of Christ, and Christ relates to us personally as he relates to us corporately. And so the beauty of that is we are all different in our learning styles and our strengths and weaknesses. And the scriptures talk about over and over again, it was in the fullness of time when the Holy Spirit came upon the Virgin Mary and Christ was incarnate. The fullness of time. Jesus began his public ministry when he was 33. Was he just sitting around doing nothing? No, he was earning a trade. He was working with his stepfather Joseph as a carpenter and what else he did. But when the time was right, the thing that he came to earth for, that it came, and I really believe that's a great metaphor for all of us. We have times of preparation, and then we have times of our own manifestation of the gifts that God has given us. And there's also time where we, are John the Baptist. We retreat so that somebody else can we pass the baton to somebody else so that they can. So that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. All right. So final thing. College is great, but don't go into debt to go to college. there's lots of scholarship money out there. There's lots of grants out there. So when you're going the college route, have your goals, help your student create goals for himself or herself, and then find the money. I know several stories where the person went to school for a year, worked for a year, paid for school, went to school for another year, back and forth. Yeah, it took them 8 years, but when they came out, gosh, they were so much more mature and got hired immediately for various professions. I have 3 or 4 people in my life that was their story, and all of them are, doing pretty well for themselves these days. So it's okay to find a way that works so that you don't have to go into debt, you or your child. And don't ever forget about that gap year. Sometimes it can be very important to take a year off so that your child works, figures out this adult thing, and then moves forward. Okay. Are there any questions? Because I know we're about out of time. Or maybe we're out of time. I don't know, Anne.
I was hoping to share a comment kind of about college and something Father Raphael said.
Yes, go ahead.
So you said that you went to college to get a physics degree and you didn't have the work ethic for it. And I identify with that strongly. And I think that needs to be considered for all of your sons, essentially, that especially as a 17, 18, 19-year-old, they're not ready for college really at all, probably. And that doesn't mean they won't be ready for it later. And, I speak in this way from experience. I went to college at a young age. I spoiled all of that time, a long time. I spoiled money, spoiled my own spiritual state, spoiled in other ways. And I came out of it with a bachelor's degree that wasn't particularly valuable. But then I went back to college and went to graduate school and was older. I was 25. I went back to graduate school and I did have the maturity to do engineering and math and pay attention in a way that I absolutely did not as an 18-year-old. And so it's kind of piggybacking on what Angela just said, that, there's no hurry to go to college at all. And if for your sons, especially if they wait until they're in their early 20s before they go at all, they will be way more successful frequently, and they will be emotionally developed well enough to go to college and not become college.
You brought up a good point, because physiologically there is still something very much going on in their brains. And you're right, the development is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they are not done percolating.
No, they're not done percolating, right?
And the rest of my story is that I didn't graduate following the formula, right? I dropped out and took and got in the police department. And while I kept taking classes, I finally gave up because I'm working midnights, and then eventually got married and got kids and all this stuff. But when I became Orthodox, and I took the St. Stephen's course, I became a deacon. I realized I really wanted to go to seminary someday. And I didn't want to necessarily be a priest. That's another story. But I did want to go to seminary. And so I had no bachelor's degree. So at the age of, when did I start? Like at 36 or something, I started with State University of New York's Empire State College. And I went back and finished my degree and then went to seminary. And with all these young bucks with their smart philosophy degrees and everything else, I was not the valedictorian of my seminary class. You can talk to my St. Vlad's professors and they'll give you a good appraisal. But my work ethic was different. I was there, for a reason. I knew what I wanted to do, what I wanted to accomplish. Totally different story. So I think that is a good lesson for, again, our young men. I think they do develop slow, more, later than the girls do. And
you're right. The brain still develops mid-20s and 30s. Thank you for reminding me of that with our 24-year-old, because his story is similar to yours. That Thomas was that he went, and so we're kind of on that threshold. I wish he could meet you. Would you like to be a mentor to my son? See, because we're right there with you. We're right there with you.
Just took a while. And I really don't, the percentage of young men 18 to 21 who belong in college is absolutely minuscule, like 1%, 2%. And even those are going to experience tremendous challenges getting through it. I didn't have my head on straight at 18, and I wasn't even looking to have a head on straight. And when somebody suggested I should have a head on straight, I, bit my thumb at them. So,
yeah, Aaron said I would get more out of college now. And it's so true, Aaron. It's true. We'd all get so much more out of college if we all went back now.
Actually, I'm kind of considering doing that. So, and these are the things that once, you've mostly graduated your children and they are moving forward with their lives, you can then go back and consider, what is it that I want to do? I actually am very blessed. I have been blessed with a position at St. Athanasius Academy, and they asked me to teach again next year, so I must be doing something right. And it's exciting to me that this is developing in my life. It's kind of funny. I didn't think that, after all of these years, graduating my sons meant that this would be something I could embrace, but God has given it to me at just the right time. So, and after all, isn't that what we want? We want it to be God's plan, and we want to be open to hear from him. And, through our priests, through our own prayers, through that check in our hearts when we're thinking about things and what are we going to do. I was telling the story last night about my kids, and my oldest has wanted to go into the Air Force since he was about 14. He was part of Civil Air Patrol. And I never worried about him going into the Air Force or into the military. I heard all kinds of stories from other moms and how their boys had gotten into messes and tattoos and drinking and all this stuff. And I always knew that that would not be the case with my son, my oldest, because he is of the disposition that if he's decided that is not something that he should, would, or could do, then he will not. And there's no talking him into it unless you're his priest. Father Alban actually had to convince Zach that he could serve at the altar as an altar boy, and that was a good thing. We couldn't talk him into it. So I didn't worry. I still don't. I don't worry about him getting mixed up with the guys that go drinking every night. I don't worry about him, getting a tattoo or whatever. My younger son, however, he at one point told me that he thought the Marines would be a good idea. And I said, no, that is not where you belong, because he is a lot like me. He's extroverted, but he has this tendency more to follow than to lead. And I could see him getting into a whole lot of trouble when he was talking about becoming a Marine. And it was kind of like, yeah, that's not going to be, no. So, and he's come to realize for himself now that, yeah, there are things that I probably should choose not to do because it would be a dangerous situation for my soul.